Good afternoon and welcome to another event for Confetti Industry Week. I'd like to welcome you to a session with Tom Juric today we're joined by. He'll be talking to you a little bit about his role as an art director for the game studio that he works for in Austria called Bongfish Studios. Please make sure that we're using the chat functionality to ask any of the questions. There's a Q&A section at the bottom, so hopefully we'll have time towards the end of the talk as well for you guys to ask any questions about this particular area. Obviously, we hope that you're going to really enjoy today's session, and a massive, massive thank you to Tom for joining us for it and taking some time out of his role to come and speak to us during this 16th Industry Week from Confetti, which is awesome. So please don't forget that you can also, there's still obviously, the rest of today and tomorrow, so there's still some events to book onto. And you can do that through going on to Industry Week, so iw.confetti.ac.uk. Some of the sessions haven't quite made it up on there, so obviously if you're aware of a session that you've heard about from your tutors or course leader, just get in touch with them. They should be able to give you a link for that if you can't find it on there. So that should be fine. You can also check out the previous year's talks. There's a section on the Industry Week website, the on-demand section, so you can check that out from there, which is great. So I think probably most people are aware, but just in case people aren't, there's actually a competition happening this week, which you can get involved in. With some cool prizes as well. So all you have to do is, just take some pictures of an event that you're involved in, and if you post them on Twitter or Instagram using the hashtag IW22, and that will just obviously share your experiences of the week. So one last thing as well to say before we jump over to Tom. So if you're currently in the final year of the undergraduate course, it is worth noting that NTU Employability Team next week are going to be offering careers coaching appointments. So that's obviously going to be very, very useful for people that are obviously transitioning on from their third year into the big world out there. Have a look on the employability website for that, or you can also find it on the employability learning room as well for that information. Okay, so without further ado, I will hand you over to Tom. Thank you very much again, Tom, for joining us. Over to you.
Thank you for the lovely introduction, Pete.
No problem.
My name is Tom. Thank you for having me. And I'm glad I can be here today and talk a little bit about myself and what it is that I do every single day. And unfortunately, not in person this year, but hopefully we can make it work another year.
Absolutely.
And I assume most of the people listening are artists, right?
We've got a mixed bag. We've got
We've got
people from different courses. So we've got people from games production, which maybe a little bit on the technology side of it, but we've got people from game art as well, both at HE level, university level, and both at college level as well. So a very, very mixed bag of an audience.
Okay, because I plan to also present and talk a little bit about what I like to call leveling up in game development. So I think maybe other people can profit from it too. But yeah, I think we can just get started. And yeah, what we're going to talk about today, of course, a little bit about me, so you have a little bit of a context. Might help clear things up, like some basic info on how to get started in game development, how I did get started in game development, and my first game, and leveling up the career, basically getting promoted. And hopefully you can get some tips here and there for yourself in the future after school or uni. And of course, first time as an art director, what kind of responsibilities I have, then covering art direction as a whole, and the kind of different types of art direction, because in game development, it's a little bit different than in other careers. And the kind of responsibilities you have, like the difference between pre-production and production. It's not quite the same, although certain things are very similar. And then we're gonna end with my day-to-day life, like the stuff I do every single day, what I deal with. And yeah, might be quite interesting, I think. Yeah, who am I? My name's Tomislav. Many people have issues saying it, so you can pronounce it as Tomislav, quite easy to remember. It's got a Croatian origin. I am Croatian, but I live in the beautiful city of Graz in Austria. And I really like art. Like, honestly, I really love it, and I can quit anytime, I swear. It's quite my obsession. But you can call me Tom, as I said, so it might be easier for the talk and later on. And yeah, my background is in media design and IT. I don't know if you call it media design in the UK, but basically what it involves is graphic design, a little bit of sound production, web design, video production, and some programming, because that's kind of what I studied in school. You can compare it to the A levels in the UK, I think. And I also did a lot of freelancing during school. Like every day after school, I would get home and do some graphic design and web design. I worked for a little agency where I did logos, websites, app interfaces, and lots and lots and lots of posters and flyers, because yeah, it's just small tasks. As a freelance teenager, I guess you don't have so many cool things to work on. And I did a few advertising and video production jobs. Like I had the nice experience to be able to direct and cut several music videos as a teenager. Like that was the most exciting part. But I also did a few small ads for TV and web. Didn't quite like it because as a designer, you don't often have so much freedom to do stuff like as you wanted. The client often has their own idea. So if you get to work with the wrong client, you don't always have freedom. Yeah. Today, I'm primarily an art director, but I do other stuff too, such as concept art, and mainly for games that are currently being made. So I visualize ideas. People would come to me, mainly game designers, saying, we want this kind of object in the game. Can you draw up something or think of something? How could it look like? And that would be my job, to come up with a solution, a visual solution to their idea. And often it's just about trying out stuff, because there will be discussions where you're not quite sure what way to go. And if there's a visual thing, like you cannot really decide what it is that you want to do, sometimes a concept artist will sit down and draw up several versions over a screenshot. Often just take a screenshot from the game and draw up something and try out things. So later on you can make actual assets and produce it in the game without spending so much time testing it out. So that's kind of what I do. And I do a lot of concept art for potential games, because we often pitch concepts to publishers. So publisher will come to us, say, we have this big IP, what would you like to do with it? And then people will think of something, like game designers will think of a game idea, and I'm often the guy who's responsible for making a concept. So the publisher has something to look at when they hear the idea. So it's not just a presentation, a boring one, it's mainly just something to look at. Often they will want finished graphics, so it looks in-game, like it's in-game graphics and screenshots. Obviously it's not, it's painted or 3D, but yeah, that's also what I do a lot. And besides concept art and art direction, I often do a lot of UI too, because I have a prior experience with web design and app design. But these days I'm mainly doing support. Like people will ask me about my opinion on different projects, and I'm quite happy to share it. And yeah, occasionally I will also do graphic design, like when the company needs some ads for events, banners for cons, like game conventions, or t-shirts for the company, and maintaining the website, or yeah, just occasional tasks. It's not really a lot, like once every few months I will have something like that. Quickly about my free time, what I like to do. I like to work for other people, but lots and lots and lots of portraits of private people and other things, album covers. I love working with musicians, so that's something I still enjoy a lot. Did a lot of things for quite famous people too. Merchandising for athletes and influencers, also one of my favorite things to do. And I do a lot of mentoring, because sometimes artists don't really know how to get started or where they are doing things wrong. So they will come to me and ask me on either via DMs or I will look at their portfolio because I've looked at a lot of portfolios for work. So sometimes I can help them, and it's proven quite a good thing because people did get jobs afterwards. I'm not sure if I was the reason or I helped, but often it did help out a lot. And I do some art classes here and there, private or in groups, and lots and lots of feedback. Critique and feedback is very important to me because I like to help people, and often people are on the wrong path without even knowing, and it can save them a lot of time if someone points them into the right direction. And if I'm done with all that work, I still do fun stuff, which is also art practice mainly, and just fun stuff for social media. This is an example what an art practice could look like. It's something I did recently with acrylic on wood. And this is an example I could do for social media. Just memes and random stuff usually. Yeah, I didn't go the same way as you guys did. You guys are studying in a university and getting actually prepared for it. I taught myself most of it. I don't know if it was a smart idea, but it worked out for me. How I started is, as a kid, I would draw all the time. I think most artists start the same. I think most people actually start the same. Everyone draws as a kid, but at some point, most people stop. Artists tend to go further and not really stop. And when I was a teenager, I figured out that the thing called Photoshop exists. And I would start making wallpapers, tuning cars, taking pictures of muscular people, putting my face on them, and typical teenage boy stuff, like stupid things actually, but it helped me a lot to learn the program and things it could do. And soon after, like through YouTube tutorials, I figured out that digital art exists. So I bought myself a cheap drawing tablet, and didn't go as well as at first because you don't look at the screen, you kind of draw on the tablet, and it was kind of a hard beginning, but it worked out. And when I got a little bit older, I figured out how to decompile and mod games. That was pre-smartphone era, so no smartphone games yet, but I did make clones of Doodle Jump and Super Mario. Like there was a Super Mario clone, and I just opened the files up in my computer and changed everything to my stuff. Like it was me running around and random little things in there. That sparked the flame in me. Like I wanted to do stuff in games, and especially games like GTA, like San Andreas and GTA 4 at that time. I would create billboards with my art on it. I would make blimps with my face, and every time I drove through the city, I would just see my art everywhere. And a lot of stupid things in the games, but that actually taught me so much about how the art in the games is built and made. Like I would see the faces of the characters wrapped up, and they looked kind of weird and flat. And I would try to figure out how to put my face on there, so it worked. And I would take photos from all angles, and didn't quite work out, but it was a beginning. I was quite young, and it was something. I even remember like when Minecraft launched, the first thing I did in the alpha was create texture packs, which isn't easy. Like it's easier today. I think it's officially supported actually. Back then it was not so hard. Like it wasn't hard, but it was a little bit more complicated, and the whole game would have my art in it. So I was all about modding games for myself, and the games might have looked horrible, but that's how I started. And here's some examples what I did in Photoshop, because you will see I cannot share so much professional work I did at work. But this is something I've done for myself a little bit later on, just as a profile picture or something. I wanted to print it out or something. I don't know. I was quite young and stupid back then. No idea how this came along. One day I had this idea, I guess, or this. Don't ask me. I was young and stupid, but it was actually quite fun and taught me a lot of the things Photoshop can do. So, or when the World Cup was like 10 years ago or something, I made this for Croatia. No idea why, just fun stuff. And this is one of the early digital paintings I did in school. This is actually still hanging in school. They wanted to do a digital art class, and the teacher only wanted to do it if I was there as a support, because she was quite knowledgeable in Photoshop, but didn't know anything about digital art. So I was basically there to support her. I could paint whatever I wanted. And one day she brought vegetables to school and wanted me to help her and the other students paint them. And this is what I came up with, just bell peppers. A few other examples with digital painting. Arnold, actually he was born like 30 minutes away from me. So he's quite popular here. And this was an anatomy practice. Or there was a while where I painted a lot of anatomy stuff, and he was one of the people I painted. Didn't quite like it, but I think I was like 17, 16 back then, and it was going in the right direction. This was actually something I hated. Like, I almost wanted to delete it, but I'm happy now because now that I found it again, I think it had potential. It's not perfect, but I think with a little bit of work, this could have been something nice. Lots of self-portraits, different styles. This looks kind of like a low poly 3D look. It's actually in 2D. So many people were disappointed when they heard that I didn't do it in 3D. But back then I had no idea about 3D, like could do nothing in it. And for Halloween, I would do stuff like this, just random stuff. And yeah, briefly summarize my art career before I got into games. Like in 2013, I would have a bet with my cousin who saw some nice art time lapses on YouTube, and I would not think much of them. Like I told him I can do the same stuff. So I started doing YouTube just to prove him wrong. And I did prove him wrong. And I did make a video, and that video blew up. It had like back then 200 subscribers from 0 to 1, like from 0 to 200 in one overnight, which is quite crazy even today, I think, now thinking of it. And with that, lots of comments appeared, and people were asking for more. The demand started growing. Like I would get lots of suggestions and orders, and I will do a lot of the stuff for free. Like whoever wanted an artwork, for me, it would be a great opportunity to practice my art, because at that point I still wasn't nearly as good as I would like to. So for me, it was just an endless pool of ideas, and people would get free art along the way. So it was a win-win situation, basically. And at some point, like I had a website where people could enter the name and their idea. And once they submit, they get like the list of names and their position, and they might be 260 something. And they weren't quite happy seeing that, because if I did like 2 or 3 artworks a week, and if they're like position 200 something, it would take several years for them to get it. So people started offering me money, and then I would do paid and free art along the side, both at the same time, kind of. And at some point there was so many people who wanted to give me money to skip in line, basically, that in 2013 this became a business. Like I was happy to earn money with art. It wasn't my goal still. I wanted to do graphic design and pursue it. But social media and doing stuff online was basically becoming a job. Like I think I finished school in 2014. So I went right out of school. I had a graphic design job and I was paid for my art. So that's the reason why I never got into university. I was so busy with work that I figured I would just do this as long as it could. And luckily it worked out. And a few years later, I mean, art was starting to pay, like it started to pay better than an agency job. And I kind of, like, I don't know if I can say it here, but I screwed myself over. I got so efficient, like I would always have the same kind of jobs, that I made templates for myself. And those templates would save me so much time that I would be paid less, because you get paid like on the amount of hours you work. And if I finished something that usually would take a week in a day or two, I would get less. And it was getting boring, same kind of stuff. And I decided to focus on art. And luckily at the same time, actually my sister found out about a job at Bongfish, which is where I work now. They asked, like they were looking for a UI artist actually. And I thought maybe I can start with UI and transition into art at some point. And even if not UI art for games, that sounded like a dream. Like I would always love to work in games. And even if I did that for the end, like until the end of my life, I'd be super happy. And unfortunately, that position was not open anymore, but obviously I still got the job. So because they saw my portfolio and they visited, like they stalked me, basically, they found my other art online and they saw the art that I did. And they thought, yeah, we don't want you to do UI, but you would be perfect as an artist, and we will kind of need an artist soon. So come into the office. And I came in, and basically right there, they offered me a job. Like that, it wasn't really an interview. It was just, we want you, please start. And luckily everything worked out. And yeah, this is where I'm now. I'm working for Bonkfish. The company was founded in 2007. We have roughly 50 people, 48, I think is the exact number, with 60 nations, so all over the world, even from the UK, from South America, from Asia, like all over Europe as well. Released about 13 games. And if you guys are ever looking for a job, we're also hiring always. Like even if it's not there, like you can apply and they might get back to you, or we might need you right away. The team is always growing. Some examples of our work, you might have heard of this game, Microsoft Flight Simulator. The team, like my coworkers, worked on it. They were responsible for the AI that recreated the entire world in 3D and using satellite data. They moved on to do much greater things after that game. But this was all over the news. Like even outside of games, all tech news were covering it because it's such an incredible feat to do. And it's also amazing, the game. I recommend it. You can visit every place in the world in 3D and fly over it. Then another game that we're still working on is World of Tanks. It's one of the largest free-to-play games. I'm not quite sure, but it is like something crazy, like 100,000 people playing every single day. And it's an incredible big game. And we were responsible for special game modes. Like there was this regular game modes, and then there was the one we did called Frontline. And Frontline was basically 9 times bigger than any other map they ever did. And that was hugely successful. Players really loved it. And we're now doing other stuff that I can't mention, but we're still working with them. Then another game that I worked on, we basically bought the entire catalog of games, Smurf games, from Capcom. And I was responsible for 2D art there. But we will get into that game in a moment because I have quite a few artworks from there to show. And a recent announcement, we started working with Star Stable Entertainment on their mobile game called Star Stable Horses. It has a huge player base, mainly girls. It's based on their massively successful MMO. I mean, I like to call it World of Warcraft with cute ponies and girl stuff. Like it's just beautiful countrysides with horses running around and ponies and unicorns even, I think. So it's a massively popular game, and I never heard of it, to be honest, before that, but looking into it, it has a huge player base. And we're like, my coworkers are working on that game, they're continuing the mobile game basically. And I'm also helping in that game a little bit with concept art if needed, and I give a lot of UI input. Yeah. I also did some fan art for Bonkfish itself. Like this is my 3-year anniversary with them. And for the 5th anniversary, I did something similar. I like to depict the fish in different ways. So this was last year in November when I hit 5 years, like the 5th anniversary. So as I said, I cannot show too much art because it's still under NDAs, but I can show Smurf stuffs, and I can show a little bit of such stuff that I did on my own. So you've just seen two. And the first game, yeah, Smurfs Village. As I said, we acquired the entire catalog, which is like 5 or 6 games, but I don't really like to mention the other games because I did not do really any work on it. We didn't update them as regularly. Like, I think each game gets 1 update in the 3 years that we worked on it. And I did like not even worth mentioning the amount of work I did on them because they didn't really need any updates. And this was the only one we did update regularly. The game received an update every 3 to 5 weeks with around 50 to 60 new assets. So it was a live operations game because of that, like that's what it's called. And it was previously owned and made by Capcom or Beeline, which is basically their mobile department somehow. Like it's their own company owned by Capcom. And they did a lot of games like Snoopy or Mega Man, Smurfs, a lot of big IPs like that. And we bought all of their mobile game, their Smurf games. The other ones, I think the company just got closed down after we bought the games. Like I think they just wanted to sell them and then close the company. And yeah, the game had about like above 100 million downloads. It had a huge community, and it's mostly people who grew up with the comics and cartoons. And the game has a very big issue because it was not stable. The player base was declining. And I was kind of part of the team that revived it. We fixed all of the issues. We changed so many things. And the drawback with that game was that you were working with a huge company that owns a very important IP. At least to them, it's super important. So everything had to be 100% precise. The art style had to be perfect. You could not allow any single flaws. And even the smallest details can be an issue. Like even the line work, they will zoom in and tell you this line is not supposed to look like this. Please study the comics more and make it look like it came from the comics. So it was quite hard at the beginning, but later on, like I became a Smurf expert after these years. If you have any Smurf questions, please go ahead. I can answer pretty much anything. But yeah, we had to sell the game in 2019. It was a smart decision, even though nobody of us really wanted it to happen. But it does make sense afterwards. I don't think I can go into detail why, but we sold it. And to go a little bit into the tasks I had before, like this is the transition from me becoming an art director from artist, like how it even happened. So it might be interesting to you for your own future careers. I was basically responsible for designing, drawing, and animating all the Smurfs. Also the Smurf huts, and basically everything else that was in the game, like characters, Gargamel, and every other canon character or newly invented character from us. It had to look the same style as it would come from the cartoon. And everything else, like even trees and stones and mushrooms, and like Smurfs is a very nature-based game, so everything had to be drawn. And especially important for me were the real currency items, because it's a free-to-play game, so you can't go without them. But I really hated the fact that some of them were overpriced. This was not a decision from us. So I tried my best to to not feel like I scammed the player with a really bad looking item. I really put all my heart into it to make it look good. And yeah, occasionally I would also do UI. It's an existing game, so most screens were already done. I just had to tweak some things when we adjusted them, like when a menu had a different functionality, the UI had to be adjusted. Or when we had a new screen altogether, I would also have to create some UI that fits to the rest of the game. And before we sold it, actually, like a year before we did, I was responsible to redesign and modernize the entire UI. The game has around 40K, like 40,000 items and Smurfs. So, and it's also 10 years old now. So you can imagine how many screens and different things there was to do. So it was quite a big task to adjust all the UI. And yeah, right before, like I think the UI changed the update after we sold it. So it was sold, the UI changed under the new publisher and developer. And social media posts. I was also the guy responsible for all sales. Like whenever we had a sale, we had a post, contests, announcements, everything basically. And I would also do a lot of the stuff for the stores, like the new game icons, then banners for the forum and Facebook and whatever. Or I would also do the trailer, which was quite funny because the trailers were always made when the update wasn't ready yet. Like with 3-week update cycles, you don't always have time for that. So the trailer was actually quite a lot of work to hide flaws and bugs before the update was even ready. But it was always quite fun. It was also my first experience working with the stores like Amazon. We put the game on Amazon, Google Play or iTunes, and being in contact with them. Like when something did go wrong, sometimes you'd have to go and contact Apple or Google and see what didn't work. So it was quite fun. And this is also the only game I can show art from because we sold it. So I will go through a few of them and explain to you what they were. And yeah, let's just go and get started. We had a lot of interactable items, which was this, for example. Like a Smurf would wander over, he would look at him, try to shake his hand, he would pick him up, put him down, and the Smurf would walk away. And this gorilla would just, I think, snore, like sleep. It was just a cycle that loops. So we had a lot of those. This was one of those I really liked. We had a few roaming Smurfs, like this was from a superhero update. He basically like did this loop, but not this quickly. Like he would stand around a little bit longer. This is just for preview purpose. And when you tapped on him, he would roam around as a smoke cloud or something, if I remember correctly. It's been a few years. So this was also one, like we would do a lot of Smurfs, and this one was designed by me, so it was not in the comics anywhere. They did have superhero Smurfs, so we were allowed to do more, but it was quite hard to get them to approve any. So this was one of them they really liked as well. Then this was a cave. I really liked the animations, I put it in here. The Smurf basically would walk in, and if you had another one, he would walk out the other one. If you had 100 one, he would pick a random one, and players really like it. Like, some of them would look at it for hours and thinking about where they would come out, which is quite funny because it was mostly 30, 40-year-old women playing the game. That was the main player base. And simple things like that could amuse them because they're not used to seeing tech like that. But for us, it was just randomizing it. Then one item, because I mentioned that we had super expensive items, and it's kind of ridiculous to say this right now, but this castle that you're looking here, it cost around 100 euros, which is around 85 pounds. Like, you can buy a AAA game deluxe edition for that price. And that's what Capcom or Beeline at that time wanted. We could not easily change it. Like, changing prices like that could impact the game economy a lot. We did end up reducing all the prices, but it was just crazy. So I wanted to put something in there for perspective. I mean, I tried my best. So this castle that you're seeing on screen, it looked a lot cooler in Christmas time. Like, it had ornaments everywhere, snow, blinking lights. So I did make it really fancy for Christmas, Halloween, Valentine's. Like, I put a lot of effort into it just to feel better about myself. Like, I don't want to have a play by or a castle that's not even interactable. Like, it's all it does is just standing there animated like this. So just wanted to put one of those examples in there. And yeah, players would brag with it. Like, obviously, if you bought an item that does nothing for 100 euros or 85 pounds, I think everybody would brag around because you would want to feel better about yourself having it. And every time someone posted a screenshot with it, people would go crazy and ask where they got it. And yeah, it actually came directly from the comics. We used to get comics in advance. We also got a lot of concept art for the movies in advance, so we could prepare updates before they were, like, we had an update ready when the movie or comic dropped. So this was one of the very popular, and it sold actually quite well, even though it was super expensive, because people liked it in the comics so much. Then let's go into a few other, like a sci-fi theme. I'm glad we got this approved because there were so many cool items, like Smurfs teleporting around. This had basically the same functionality as the cave. Like, he would pop out a random, I don't know what you would call it, like a teleportation booth. And they really liked it. And it was super easy item because we could just copy paste the functionality of the cave. But I'm glad we got this approved, so I want to put it here. The Smurf border, he was actually shown in the first trailer of the last movie, and I saw in the comments that this was super popular. People liked it, so I think others had the idea too, but I went ahead and suggested we should put it in somehow, and I came up with this concept, and it proved also to be super successful because everything that's shown in movies will have a wide audience of people who already know that, so they would like to see it in the game. Same with these dancing female Smurfs. I mean, they did not only dance, they had other things. But this one was special because it had like 4 or 5 different dance moves, and they all look different. And if you tapped one of them, she would walk to the next one, and basically they would all form a conga line. So if you had 100 of them, they would make a huge conga line and work out, dance basically through the whole village, and eventually they would all go back to their places. I mentioned we had a lot of huts, so let's go through some of them. This was Tourist Smurf. He would walk through your village and take photos of the random stuff. He wouldn't actually take photos of anything. Like, he would just randomly go somewhere and take a picture. But players loved it. Like, they would put so much time into decorating things, and then when he accidentally went over there and took a picture, they would make screenshots and post it on social media, and even on their Instagrams, and they would tag us and tell us how happy they are that we put them in. Like, even the smallest things would have an impact, and it's quite nice to see small things like that make people so happy. Then the next one, Fairy Tale Hut, which was also for real money, but not so much, I think like 10 euros. You could change the roof color. And people liked that whenever we did that. So if they can change the colors, they would buy multiple. And if they buy multiple, and then they can have variation, like one hut would be blue, the other one red, then the green one, and whatever. So they liked having those items, and this was a very popular one as well, so I put it in here. Bubble Smurf, he would blow bubbles. Like he would just stand there, have his hut, which is bobbing up and down, and blow bubbles. But you could only win him if you won all the items of a minigame, I believe. So he was the final thing you could unlock. Samurai Smurf is one of my favorites, so I put it in here. We had a whole update with Chinese, Asian, Japanese themed stuff, and he was the main Smurf of that update. And there was lots of pagodas and Asian dragons, and a lot of cool things in that update. So I had to put him in here. Classic hut. I put this here because it was a battle to get this one approved. This was actually the first art style of the Smurfs. I mean, it did not have color, it was just black and white comic. But before the Smurfs were even approved, this is like what the huts looked like. And the license holder hated the idea of having them. Like they didn't want them mixed with the new style. And we knew that players would love that. And they did eventually love that. And they bought a lot of them. And like the color were also changeable. So they built a whole village with those huts with different colors. And it ended up being super successful, but we had really a hard battle about getting this one in. I'm glad we did because it's quite unique. Not the prettiest hut, I have to admit, but it's quite a unique one. And Halloween Smurf. He is just a Halloween Smurf with a quite unique hut. The face of the pumpkin would flicker randomly, and then at night it would look super cool. And this is all. I didn't want to make like an hour long of Smurf stuff, so I actually put a lot of it on my art station. So if you want to scan or take a picture of this QR code for later, there's a lot more art about Smurfs. I think it's even starting with the first item I ever made, and then just going through most of the cool updates. Like it's not even close to all. I made like over 1,000 items, but there's a lot. Like on ArtStation, there's a lot more than these, and I think all new ones. I didn't put any double. So if you're interested, feel free to check it out. But let's go into why and how I went and transitioned to art director, because I think that's what you guys are more interested. The game had a lot of room for improvement. Like the art pipeline looked like this. We would draw and animate everything in Photoshop. So Photoshop is not the best program for animation. I think most of you will know that. You can download plugins. None of them would work with the way we did it. And it was all frame by frame animation. So every frame had to be drawn, and we were very limited with how many frames you can use because the game was so huge. Making an item that on itself is pretty huge will immediately have a big impact on older devices, and they wouldn't run the game anymore. So yeah, we had to slice and export everything so it could fit into atlases. The more atlases you have, again, low-end devices might stop supporting the game and they might crash and couldn't get into the game anymore. People would get upset. So it was quite difficult to manage all that. And one big item would have hundreds and hundreds of PNG files, like 200 to 300, and even more sometimes. But I think we had a limit which we couldn't go over. Don't remember the exact number anymore. It's been a few years now. But yeah, after that, we would have to animate everything again. So you would spend all the time in Photoshop and then take all the PNG files and put all them in a custom-made animation tool, which was made in HTML and JavaScript, which means you had to run it in a browser, which means like if you have ever worked with Google Chrome, you know how much RAM it likes to take, even if you have it running without any websites. So if you have a website that has like hundreds of PNG files open, you can imagine how great it ran. And it had lots of bugs, very clunky, very painful. But the files it exported were ready for the game. Like if we once animated it, once it's animated, the file it exports can go straight to the developer, and the developer would just have a few lines of code to implement it. It was super easy for the developer, very painful for the artists. And that was basically how the developers would get it. But I wasn't really happy with it. Like there was a lot of room for improvement, as it says here. So I started suggesting and changing things. I found a screenshot of the animation tool. I don't have it here. I wish I could do a live presentation on how it worked, because it was quite painful. Like, I have no idea what this means, like CS, CE, SX, SX, EX, and then here it's again. Like, this is just double, up, down, delete, clone, top, bottom. Okay, you can make that up, but often I would just want to move a layer up, but I would press delete. There was no undo function, so you had to load that thing back in and move it down, and it was quite painful. And pain, I guess this is the amount of pain the artist felt doing this. I have no idea. So this is what we got from Capcom. They programmed this, they made this, and I basically had to figure out everything on my own by looking into the code and changing things and seeing what it does. And the artists that basically had to teach us about it didn't know how to answer most questions. They just knew the basic features. But I myself, like, I see them, and I know that this thing has potential and it probably can do a lot more stuff than they told us. So I did want to figure it out. Just maybe it's useful stuff. Like, you never know. So, oh yeah, the timeline. This is what the timeline looked like. Up here, you would see the amount of frames, and these are the PNGs. And this is one frame. So this is around 1.4 seconds. And imagine if you have 10 seconds. So, or 30 seconds. We had one 30 seconds. That item gave me a legit headache for weeks. Like, you would have 30 of these, no, 300 checkboxes. I was doing my math wrong. 300 checkboxes in this direction, and it had like 200 layers. So you would have a huge grid of checkboxes. And for every single frame, you would have to press each of the checkboxes to have it shown on that frame. If you had, like, if it had to be shown on the entire thing, you could just press here, but often that would not be the case. So you would have to click on each of the checkboxes. And if you're like down here in this direction, you would no longer see this again. So you would just see a whole screen of checkboxes, and you would have to press that. And it was legit, like, painful. So what did I do? I had web design experience, and I started improving the tool. I improved the usability. Like, it had icons, it had explanations, it had real words in there, not just SX, EX, Y, whatever. It had a structure, like things were spaced apart, they looked a little bit nicer. Basically added the CSS. It just had an HTML and JavaScript. Like, you could tell a developer made this with no art insight, or they didn't really care. So they would never work with it. So it was the artists having to do all that stuff. And with the previous company, I know that the art department and developers had no real contact. So the artists would work on their own and developers would work on their own. With us, it was quite different. So I started doing changes whenever I had free time. And I deciphered the entire code and I tried to understand. It was a bit painful, but I managed. I added a lot of comments in the code. So the company after us, they got a lot of things handed to them. Like, if they wanted to change things, now they can do them because they know what things are. And I made it a scrollable list. Like, you wouldn't have to scroll the entire website. You could just scroll small parts, and you would always have the item in your view. And you could only like scroll through the layers instead of the whole thing. Mouse over tooltips. Like, you could go with your mouse on top of every single box and name, and it would display a whole list of things you can do, possibilities that you have, what you shouldn't do, what works quite well. Like, I did all that. I put everything in there, and I put explanations for everything, as I just mentioned, and I wrote the whole documentation. Like, even if that didn't help, you could go on the top and there was like help me or something. And if you pressed on it, it would open a whole new page with a very detailed explanation of what everything did. And we had previews. So the item wouldn't just be shown on a gray background. It would actually be like, with a single button press, you could adjust the background color. Every area in the Smurfs game had a different background. Like, either it was green grass, blue grass for space, sand, or light green for another area. And you could easily preview it with just a button press. It was simple stuff in CSS actually, but they never thought of it, and it saved us so much time, and it was amazing. Yeah, just a little thing, and saved us a lot of time in the future. Yeah. So the tool was so much easier to work with. And here's a little preview. This was not the final one. As I said, I lost the tool somewhere. It's somewhere in the archive, but we did not know that you can change colors. Like it would basically, the multiply effect from Photoshop, as you know it, is implemented here, and you can easily use it on items. We didn't know that. I figured it out later, and you can even animate it. So if you put a color code here and one here, it would basically start with that, and then by the end of the animation, it would end up with the other one. So it enabled us to do a lot cooler animations without doing so much, just color code. So if you had a pure white item, you could animate it and make it all rainbow colors and flickering and super cool stuff, and it saved us a lot of assets in reality. And here on the side, like I deciphered things, it was actually the position, and you could also animate between it. Paint was for paint. You could repaint items because players have the ability, as I said, with the roofs. If I put a 1 here, I think the later versions actually had a checkbox, so you didn't have to press a 1 or put in a 1. It glow. So if you wanted something to look good at night, so it wasn't affected by the night shader that the game had, you would put in a 1 or a checkbox later on, and it would actually be shown, and fire and flames and everything looked really cool. But this was something that they explained to us beforehand because that's something they knew. And here, no longer up, down, top, bottom, actually icons in an order, so you don't have to mispress, and clone and duplicate is on here because it kind of made more sense to have it here. And you could remove that list, you could enlarge these icons, you could skip right down to the item. So if there was a huge list, just press there and you see the item right away. And you could scroll up and down. Usually it would just be a huge list and you would always have to scroll up and down. It was quite painful. Here's the old one as an example. I'll just skip through a few times. It's better. It's not perfect. I wish I had more time to work on it, but it was a huge improvement. And if we didn't sell the game, I think by now it would have been a much different tool. I just didn't have a lot of time because I was all doing all the art stuff. Yeah, besides the tool, I did a lot of other improvements that helped me get to the point where I did art direction officially. For example, I documented everything. The other artists before us, they just verbally taught each other, which was kind of a waste of time. Like you could write down so many things, and if a new artist starts, you can just read through it and he would know everything. And I would explain processes, the simplest stuff, but also how to keep the game optimized, like for longevity. So the game, as I said, it had over 40,000 items. Low-end devices were already struggling. And it's all about optimizing Atlas space and doing animations and art the right way. And I wrote all that down. So the new artists now, they know all that because someone told them how. We didn't have that. We had to figure it out by talking to the developers, which is the next point. I talked a lot with the developers. In my free time, in breaks, after work, if they were up to it, of course, I didn't bother them. But in meetings and such, I would just go to them and try to understand the game from a technical side, just so we could improve art processes. I also tried to understand the limits and figure out why there were limits, because Beeline, the prior developer, they just said, this has to be this way. And the developer, once I asked them, he said, well, no, it doesn't have to be this way. I don't see why. So for example, we had this island area, which was basically had like a lot of water around it. And they just told us you cannot place anything in the water. It will break the game because there's a ship that has to travel to the island. But the ship only took a small space. All the other stuff was wasted space. So I talked to the developer and asked, like, we already have water items. You just have to place a pond before you could place the item. Why can't I take the item and place it in the water? And they said, well, you can. It's just the code doesn't allow you right now, but there's no restriction. So turns out it was quite an easy change. And we just blocked the path of the boat, but everything else was free to play around with. And we made a huge update, like a vacation update, and we would add Smurfs that are swimming around, playing in the water with beach balls and penguins, dolphins, like even reefs, if I think, like coral reefs. And that was one of the most popular updates because people hated the empty ocean and they really wanted to do something with it. And it was really super easy change that they never thought about because they just said it has to be this way. It turned out it doesn't have to be this way. You just have to think a little bit and talk to the right people. This is also the point where I said their teams did not talk with each other. We did talk with each other. I talked with the developers. The previous team didn't really have any contact with the developers. Quite sad if you ask me. And I also talked a lot with the game designer. He was with the Smurfs since the very beginning. So we took him with the game, basically, since he would already lose his job since the other company closed down. We offered him a job, so he continued working on the same project, just in a different company. And I suggested that we use the engine's full potential, like make areas usable, like just mentioned the water and some other parts, or improve how items looked at night. The night engine, like it looked fairly weird, but with the glow option in the animation tool that you just saw, you could do so many things that they never thought about. But it doesn't have to be fire. It could be other things that are not affected by the glow. And they looked incredible at night. I wish I had an example, but we had so many items, I couldn't find it. I don't remember their names. But if I do, I will add them to my art station for sure, because they looked really cool at night. And I helped a lot with creating more unique items, because I then kind of understood what we could do. And we did do a lot of cool stuff, especially for real money items, because those needed the biggest improvement. If they are already spending so much money, make it worth it, at least to some extent. It's never worth it, in my opinion, paying so much for a simple item in the game, but at least make it somehow think like, let them think it's worth it, at least. And yeah, using a lot of forgotten features, because we had items that only had a functionality that were made 10 years ago, and nobody ever thought about using that stuff again. And I just suggested, why not? And we did just copy paste the code with a different asset, and players liked it, and it was easy work for us, actually. And yeah, then a year later, after doing all this, and I got approached, or basically we both kind of had the same idea at the same time, my producer and me, about officially doing art direction, because I was already doing all that on my free time. I also did all the other art, but every free moment I would spend on optimizing stuff. And the game designer would come up with the item. He would tell me, we need this castle in this area. It has this functionality. I don't know, it just looks pretty on this for that price, like 100 premium currency, which is the currency that you have to spend time or money to earn. So it's not like currency that's freely available. Either you spend a lot of time or money on it. And so it was quite a premium item as well. So I would come up with the look and animations. I would write down, it's a castle, so it has to be approximately this high, this big, I don't know, jungle themed, and would have a waterfall or birds flying around. I would basically come up with all that. It was quite fun. Not quite what art direction should be, but this game was already in production for so long, it already had an art direction. So my job back then was more figuring out making the item as good as possible so they would sell well, and optimize it, like using full potential of what we could do without spending too much time on it, because we still wanted to make this all doable within 3 weeks with so many items. And I communicated a lot and gave a lot of feedback. Communication means I communicated the start of the art status to the producer. So she would always be like informed where we are struggling, what is kind of not going well, what is working well, and with the license holder, because sometimes they would have a question about our art, like they would question it, they would not like it, and my producer would not be able to answer such art questions. I mean, she could if I gave her all the information, but I often just handled it, and I would get into the call and ask them why they didn't like it, and then find an option why it could work or how it could work for them and us, so we didn't have to redo everything like 4 or 5 days before the update went live. And yeah, organizational tasks, which meant I'm making sure that every item has a task somewhere written down in our program, so nothing gets forgotten. That was one of the tasks I had. And I kept track of every single update. I made a spreadsheet for myself actually at the beginning, and it calculated the workload per artist. So I could make sure that every artist is approximately doing the same amount of work. So it's not only one guy doing all the heavy items and the other guy gets all the easy ones. So I had a system where it could calculate how much workload it had per artist, but also per update. So the update would be compared to other items, like other updates, not items. So I know that if this update has a workload of 100, like it doesn't mean anything by itself, but if you look at the update before, which has one of 50, you know, okay, this is going to be twice as much work in the same amount of time. Can we do it? Can we cut something? Can you do it easier? Can we split in 2 updates? So this is something I did, and I did a lot of direct communication with beta testers. So this is something that was not it was not part of my job, but I still did because our beta testers were super active and high spending, like they spend a lot of money and time in our game, and they had access to updates before everyone else, and they had a secret section in the forums where only they could communicate about the new beta updates before anyone else even knew what the update was going to be. So I nicely asked our community manager, who already helped me a lot to understand what players think and what they want. And I got directly in touch with players, like basically our best players, the ones that we could count on the most. They would give me direct feedback, and I would often change things on the fly, like a day or two before the update. And it turned out to be quite good because it helped us understand what the player wants. And I would often also go back, like they would DM me, like write me a private message and say, hey, I know you're doing all this work, but there's this one item that is super cool, but it's this tiny and has such a huge space around it where you can't place anything. Or it's super pretty, but it kind of doesn't work anymore because one update broke it. So I would often, in my free time, like where there's a free moment or would just stay a little bit longer after work, I would go in and change that item, which often only took a few minutes, just had to figure out what the issue was. And then I would kindly ask the developers if they could just change that one file. And we would basically go back and change old items that are kind of broken or not quite as good as they could be with the help of our testers. So that helped and improves our art a lot in the game. People were really happy with what we did with the game. Like we even changed minor stuff like that nobody really expected. We still did the changes. And besides all that work that I just mentioned, I was still an artist myself. So I did all the same art stuff that I did. And like people often joke around, you get a promotion, but you actually just get more work. For me, it was fun because I already did all that stuff. It's just more official now. And yeah, it was quite heavy. It was not always as easy, but being the person who who structured the updates and said who does what amount of work, I could make sure that I myself don't have too much of a workload on the art side itself. Although I did carry a lot of updates, like when an artist was sick or couldn't work, I would do a lot more myself and not as much of art direction stuff. But yeah, the result of all that, just because I wanted to mention it, players loved it. It was incredible to see their response. The sales went through the roof. The positivity went up, and players finally felt like they were going to be heard. And of course, we all were happy. And also because I really want to mention it because it's important to me, every team member did their part. I don't want to make this sound like art is the only thing that changed this game. Art is just the first thing the player sees and reacts to. Like if they react to the game, to the developers, it's usually negative because if the developers' work is often underappreciated and players don't recognize it until it's broken. Like if something's broken, they will blame the developers. If something works smoothly, they will not give any positive feedback because they just expect it to work smoothly. Art is just the thing that players see the first and that they like to compliment. Nobody compliments a tester or game designer. Game design sometimes get compliments, but testers never, usually. And yeah, lots of our ideas never got implemented because we had to sell the game, had a lot of ideas and plans. But we did move on to another game where that was the first game where I really had art direction. Like, we started from zero, so we didn't have any clue what we're going to do. And it was an unannounced mobile title, so I can still not talk about it because it's still being pitched to publishers and eventually it might be published. I don't know, if you follow Bonkfish, you might hear about it one day. I don't know, in the future, could be still very open, could not turn into anything, but I still can't say anything. But I can tell you what I did on it, which is probably more interesting anyways. So pre-production, which is before production. So just gathering. I will get to that. I don't want to explain anything right now. You will hear about it. It's defining the art style, like for an art director. I had to come up with the look and feel of the game. And I had to figure out what the art style, like what are we going for? What do we want? How do cutscenes look like? And not only that, but how do we make them like that? How do we make them work? And how does the UI feel? Like, you have to think about that. Does it work with the gameplay? Does it work with the style of game? It's a mobile game, so UI is kind of important. And it's quite different to a PC game. And like, what can we even do with the engine? What tools are we using? Like, we had a discussion about Spine or Spriter, which is basically kind of the same program. It's an animation program. If you guys are used to Unity, you don't have to think about these things, but they're quite powerful animation programs. And they're quite similar. One costs around 50 euros and the other one costs about 150. So I was researching the difference. Should we invest the money into the more expensive one? Do we have all the features? Do we have enough features? Do we still need another program to do stuff that we can't do there? And we actually went with the cheaper one, and it turned out that it didn't quite have all the features, so we ended up wasting a lot of money. Sometimes that happens, but it wasn't a lot of money because it was quite cheap, so it was okay. And I want to mention that it's not just me. Like, I'm a guy, I like to hear everyone's opinion, because especially working with artists, they have ideas on their own. They are creative. They might have amazing ideas. And I often would sit in meetings and just sit and talk, like listen to them, present my idea, and then hear them out. And especially with the animation program side, they had a lot of experience with one of the programs, with Spine. And that's basically why we ended up changing, because we figured out along the way that a lot of things are quite complicated, are not really working. Spine could do that quite easily. One artist knew about it, and we ended up deciding against it and switching mid pre-production. In production, you can't really do that, but in pre-production, you can still play around and change things. And yeah, I'm taking the responsibility in the end, but I like to hear everyone's opinion because they really matter to me. And for this game, especially during production, we did have a short production. I think it was half a year to a year, because it's just a prototype. It's not a finished game. It's in a state where you can play, like you have an hour or two of gameplay. It's just enough to send it to a publisher and they can play around with it, see if the game has potential. Not even all features are in there. They just know about the features because they get a presentation along with it. But yeah, production was quite short, but I was responsible for the UI. It was a small team. It was just me and another artist then working on all of that. All smaller games, usually, like if we are pitching them ourselves, we don't want to invest so much money into a game that might not turn up to be anything. So you often have quite small teams working on them. So as an art director, you still get to work on a lot of things yourself. Thankfully, there are periods where I don't do any art for months. But here I had a lot of work actually to do. So I did all of the UI, I animated and storyboarded all of the cutscenes. And I designed all the backgrounds, like every location the player would be in. I think all but one background are done by me. And I designed also a lively 2D hub, like almost 2.5D, because it has a cool parallax effect, which looked kind of cool. Sadly, I can't show it. But it was quite a beautiful game, so I really hope it gets picked up by a publisher. And yeah, I gave a lot of feedback, like every artwork that's been shown in the game. I went through all of them. I gave feedback. I also do ask a lot for feedback myself, because I'm still an artist myself, and other artists might have a different opinion or might see something that I don't immediately see. So I like to ask other people for feedback as well. And I think that's a great thing to do anyways. So get feedback as much as you can. Usually that's a good tip. And to summarize, because those are the 2 projects prior to the current one that I'm doing. This current one is a fairly big project. It's a PC game and console game, and it's mid pre-production. We're starting production. No, we're starting. I can't really say anything now. I kind of don't want to mess it up, but we're mid pre-production. So let's talk about art direction a little bit, and then I can't show, but I can talk a little bit more about what bigger games look like from an art direction side. But in other careers, because I really think that's interesting, advertising, I have an advertising background. The art director speaks to the client mostly, and they communicate with the designer. So they are like the interface between client and designer, and they make sure the client's message is conveyed. The client is their biggest priority. They will make sure that everything the client wants is in there. So, but the designer never gets to talk to the client really. It's weird. I worked with one guy, he didn't care about design that much. He just wanted the client to be happy, which is kind of bad. But from my experience, they are not necessarily designer. I had friends who still do art, graphic design, and they run into a lot of art directors who really don't know anything about the design part. They just know how to market stuff and if the message that our design conveys is correct, which is okay. But I think I prefer people to work with people who know what they're talking about a bit more. So I'm kind of glad to not work in here anymore. But it's quite different, as you see. Art directors in advertising are not the same. And in movie production, because I heard a few people who do that. Like I know one guy who's doing art direction in a movie studio, in a small one, but still. They are overseeing the set and prop creation mostly. That's what they are all about. And they do a lot of admin work like budgeting and schedules, make sure things can be done on time, or if not, could the VFX team that's working do it? Like they would often communicate with the visual effects director and ask them if they have the budget and time to do certain things, which they can't finish. If there even is a VFX team, like some things are done in CG today. Many companies only do CG, so art directors don't really have so much stuff besides being on set and making sure looks look good. And they're often very experienced, and they've been there, they've done the job, and they have quite a lot of experience usually. But what you most care about is what does a game development art director really do? Because it sounds fancy, but it's basically a supervisor. I'm responsible for keeping a schedule in mind, similar to what other art directors might do. And I need to cut workload here and there. Like sometimes things don't really work out, and I need to make sure that we keep the most important stuff, or that things get done in time. Like you can't always cut stuff. Some cut stuff is very important. So you have to improvise and improve the workflow or find faster ways to do certain things. That's not always easy, but you always also have to keep in mind that the whole art department has to be on track. So you're not just managing your own stuff. Like right now I'm working with several art departments, like several artists who all do different stuff. And I need to make sure they're all moving in the same direction and that no department is behind. Like if they have problems, communicate, figure out what the problem is and how we can get there and how we can fix it. And I also need to make sure that all art is following the same direction, that one person is not suddenly, like not even on purpose, but they sometimes might think of something else and do it differently, and they might not really know why it's wrong. So you have to give a lot of feedback. You have to write documentation and create mood boards. So everything that helps can make it clearer. So they have pictures to look at, they have text to look at, they have everything that helps them understand the direction and the vision of the game. So this is my job to do. And usually in game development, the art director always has a background in art. They have to know all the departments, what they are capable of doing. And if things are not going wrong, like going smoothly, they need to kind of know why. Like I talk a lot with different departments, and like if a tech artist who's kind of more specialized in tech stuff says something is not going smoothly, I need to kind of be able to understand him and why. And it's not an issue if you don't understand, but make sure to read about it and to talk with the artist to understand. Because if you don't understand the department, you will have a lot of trouble later on figuring out why things are going wrong, and things might not be going as smoothly because you have no idea what's happening. So the pre-production responsibilities are kind of similar to the ones in production, and we already covered, like for the other games, what I had to do. But this game is a little bit different because it's bigger, and I figured it would be more interesting. Lots of concept art. At the beginning, you have to define everything, define the entire art style, make sure that when you are in production, everything is already figured out. And there is an art Bible, which is what we like to call the documentation, where everything is set in stone. Like later on in production, you cannot go back and change the art style. It all has to happen in pre-production. Often it might be fairly short. So it's a very important task to figure out, and documenting every single thing is very important, because if you ever leave the company unexpectedly or you're not there, all those answers need to go from your head into somewhere where people can look it up at any given time. And setting up the workflow and pipeline, which hopefully will ensure a smooth production. So later on, there are no questions. And it's a very collaborative process. So I don't like to do all that myself. I think no art director does it yourself, because you need to figure out what each department wants and what their needs are. Like, is there a certain file that they really need to have at a certain point? So make sure that other departments know, okay, you need to, when you finish, make sure all this stuff is ready for them to go. And just figure out, like, often you can't even ensure it's perfect. Like sometimes it doesn't just work out, but figure out a solution that works. So in the future, everybody knows this is the way we're doing it. And help hiring. At the beginning of each project, not always, like sometimes the company will have enough artists that are ready to work on it. But especially with this big project that I'm currently on, I will have, like, we will need a lot more artists that the company currently has. All other artists are very busy with other projects, so we will need a lot more artists. And currently, I'm reviewing a lot more portfolios than usual. And I also set up some art tests, because I kind of know what I want to see later on in the artist, like what they have to be able to do. And you also cannot ask for too much, because I don't want an artist to sit for 2 weeks on a test and they might not even get hired. So it's really small tests that also have to show you a lot. Of course, they also have a portfolio, so you know what finished work looks like, but the tests often don't even have to be finished. At least that's my taste. I can't promise that other companies do it the same way, but I look at it from an artist perspective, and I myself would hate to sit for 2 or 3 weeks on an art project and not even get hired, and it's all wasted time. And I know there are some scammy companies that even use art tests for final art, which I think is completely no-go. And I'm responsible for doing art tests and reviewing them. But in the end, I only give recommendations. So I'm not saying we hire this guy. I can only say to HR or the producer or CEO that this person is good at certain things, maybe not so good at this, and maybe they need some mentoring, or I don't know, maybe we need to teach them some stuff. But yeah, I just give recommendations at the end of the day. And during production, it's very similar. We still keep the schedule in mind, but even more so, because it's way more important. If things don't go as smoothly, you might have to delay the release, and the publisher might not want to hear that, because they have a release in plan, like they have it planned out, they have marketing for it. They don't want to announce any delays, Players also might not like it. So things need to go on schedule, and it's very important during production. And I also have to make sure all departments are happy. Like, what do they need? Is everything going smoothly? Can I help out somewhere? Do we need more artists? Do we need any tools? Is there anything to help their work? And review all their work. Like, does stuff work fine? Find solutions to problems. I think I just mentioned that, but like, people will have a lot of questions and I need to find solutions. And sometimes I would just sit for days and research. Maybe there's like articles online that have had the same issue and have recommendations. And I just have to try to make it work also with the department. Like, I'm not doing it on my own. I will always have another artist who is basically working on that thing and have his opinion, because he's having the problem. He will know if that's a solution or not better than I will. And in production, communication is super important. Like, I will talk with the producer, let him know what's happening, the game designer, and often the publisher, because publisher, especially during production, they will have lots of questions and they will want to make sure that things are going smoothly. I think some publishers are very strict at this and some aren't. Some will just let you, like with the Smurfs, our publisher was very open. Like, he liked our work, or it's not a person, it's a company. And they just let us do whatever we wanted. They trusted our process after a while and they didn't even ask. They just saw good numbers and we could do whatever we wanted. But not always the same case with other publishers. So they will often have questions and they will want to see art, of course. So final part of the presentation, my current day-to-day, as I said, I do several different things. So let's start with art direction. Currently, I'm in the process of setting up the art Bible that we mentioned. Figure out how everything looks like, which is also a great combination with me being a concept artist, because I can just draw it down and make stuff. Like, other art directors who are not that much of a concept artist, they might find pictures online that are similar or work. I just go in there and make my own stuff. Or I will also use pictures, of course, like mood boards and references and everything. But if there's nothing that suits my taste, I will just make it my own. So it's a good thing about being a concept artist. I'm figuring out the feel of the art. Like, what do we want the player to feel like when he looks at this? Do we want him to be sad, happy, excited? Like, all those things are very important questions at the end of the day. And currently, we're also figuring out how animations work. What tools do we need? And basically how are assets created? Like, to what level do they need to be? And how can we create lots of assets with high variation, but with a little effort? That's something that I myself am not too experienced in with 3D, but I learn a lot every single day, to be honest. I'm a 2D artist at the end of the day, so working with a lot of 3D artists really, really taught me a lot. In like, every day I will learn so many new things, and it's quite interesting. I will also review a lot of assets. I think I keep saying this, but everything is important. Like, the models, are the poly counts okay? The materials, do they look good from a distance? Does the animation look good? Is there any room for optimization? Every angle, does the animation look good from this side? Will the player ever see this side? Are materials important from every angle? Like, it's super important to look at all those things. And sometimes artists will neglect certain things, not on purpose, of course, but it's my job to make sure that they don't. So it's important to keep those things in mind. And I will answer a lot of questions, as I said. Lots of questions every single day. I feel like there's days where I just go from person to person and answer their questions. Sometimes I will know the answer and it will be great, and I can direct them where they will find it. We just tell them in person. Sometimes I won't, so I have to research. And if I research and I find it and I do have an answer, I will often just document it. So it's set in stone, and no longer people don't have to message me anymore about it or go to me or whatever. And sometimes it will even be a question that surpasses what I do, and I will have to sit down with game design and talk with game designers, see what they think. Do they have an answer, or have they even thought about it? So we will have to brainstorm together. So that's something I did, like, even yesterday. A super important question that we haven't even thought about, but an artist was struggling with something, and then we realized, okay, it's kind of an oversight, But since we're in pre-production, those things happen, and it's quite good that it happened now rather than later. So yeah, have a lot of meetings every single day. I give updates to like producer and other departments, and I present a lot. I do a lot of presentations like I'm doing now. And I ask for the current status a lot. Like I will go to each artist and ask them how it's going, if they're feeling well, like if things are going right, if they have any issues, what we can figure out, if there's any questions. Like it's a lot about talking with people, as you notice, art direction. Like you think a lot and you talk a lot. Not so much art, but sometimes there's also art involved, which is my favorite part, actually, which we're coming to now, concept art. Yeah, basically figure out everything. How does everything look like? Big structures are kind of easy. Like huge structures, landscapes, monuments, things that players will love to look at, and it will make the game nice and everything. But also small stuff. What does the grass look like? Foliage, like rocks. All those things have to be figured out and put somewhere. So the artist, whenever he gets there, he will know that this is what they will do and how they will do it. And I often sit down with artists as well. Like an environment artist will help me with grass. They know what kind of shaders they could use to make it work, or if it can even be done in 3D, because a lot of stuff might look good in 2D, but it does not really work in 3D. So with this game especially, I adjusted my workflow. I pretty much start everything in 3D and I paint on top of it. And especially when I'm doing sculpts, like of characters and bigger stuff. And I do a lot of blockouts. Like it's not final art. I'm not a 3D artist, as I said. It's just good enough for the 3D artist to continue working from there. And it might still not work. It might look weird. So we might need a new concept or a new solution, or we will just make it work somehow. It's rarely the case that we need a new concept, because a lot of things are just small issues. But I'm sure one day I will go back and completely rethink an asset that was pretty cool, but ended up not working at all. So yeah, another thing that I do a lot is visualize a lot of stuff. The game designers will often come to me and say that they have this idea of gameplay and they want me to sketch out what it could look like. It's really just stick figures, like really not final stuff, but they will come to me and ask for that. And sometimes they will put that in their presentation so publishers can visualize an idea better rather than just walls of text. And that's also something I do quite often. Like it's really not final art. And something that I really want to say here is that not all art looks as good as it does in art books. I always thought when I became an art director or a concept artist, that all my art will have to look as good as in those books. Now that I know a few artists that are featured in such books, I know that they went back and changed a lot of the art to make it look super pretty. And art books are a separate project on their own. They need a lot more work than they actually put in at first. A lot of art concepts are fairly done, like fairly fast. And I think ArtStation is a good place to look at real concept art because it has a lot of unfinished stuff. Final words. We're coming to an end, and I would just quickly like to summarize, like, would I like to pick this career again if I could? 100%. Like, I love it. And I'm quite new at it. Like I've been here at this position for about 4 years now, and every project is vastly different. And this is something you also can, you might be an artist or whatever you might be. It doesn't matter, actually. Every project will be different. So if it's a huge team, your goal, like you might do only one thing and other people will do other things. But if it's a small project, you might be responsible for a lot more things. So this is one of the projects where I'm doing a lot more art direction than before, which is actually kind of scary, but I have to admit it's super exciting. I love it. As a kid, always wanted to make my own games, and I'm pretty much making it right now. It's not my game, but people trust my judgment. And I basically decide the art style, which is amazing if you ask me, but only to some extent, because the publisher has an idea what they want, what is marketable, what's kind of popular right now. and it has to fit to the game design, because you cannot make a current example, Elden Ring with a Nintendo art style might not work. It might be a cool game, actually, thinking of it, but doesn't quite work. And I can't present an art style like that to a game like that. I think I would lose my job kind of fast. People won't take me serious. But yeah, I would recommend this career if I could, because I mean, especially if you like keeping a team in check, being responsible for a lot of things, if you like presenting stuff. I know a lot of artists, me included, are introverts, and you're not really huge about presentations. But if you really like if you have a huge imagination and you're good at putting it down on paper and explaining it, communicating it properly, this really might be your career. But generally, a suggestion to everyone, I think the most important thing is just getting started in game development, having fun doing it, whatever it is that you do. Just have fun, see what you like, and maybe opportunities might present themselves to you, like things that you would like to do. Or you could just talk with your company, whoever is then responsible for you. Maybe you could slowly grow into a role that you really want to do someday. And as sad as this sounds, you might even have to change a career if this is not working for you, or that if you really want to do something and pursue a dream, but there's no chance that you will ever do that in that company. Luckily, that was not the case for me, but I know a few people who had to do that and they're super happy now. But I honestly just wish you all the best in the future. And thank you so much for listening to me. I really hope and I wish you all the best with your graduation. I think most of you are graduating this year. I hope you all find a job pretty soon and that you're really happy at that job. And big thanks again to Pete and the whole Confetti Institute for having me. And I think I'm done, and I'm really open for some questions. If you don't have any now, feel free to message me online. Like I'm ready to answer anything that you guys want. Thanks.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you so much, Tom. Wow. That was a lot of really useful information. Yeah, thank you so much. Like, obviously, there's lots of sort of parts that I liked about it as well, in terms of what I thought was really interesting and exciting to sort of hear about. I mean, we do have separate courses here. We have separate kind of game art area and a games production area. But one of the things I really picked up on from listening to your talk there was just really how important it is to at least have a kind of an understanding or an oversight of perhaps that different area. So obviously, someone that's has a strong foundation within the art area. I can see that you spent a lot of time having to look at some of the maybe slightly more technical aspects involved in what you're doing as well there. But I suppose that that will work vice versa as well. Obviously, from someone that's perhaps a little bit more involved in the tech side of it, having an appreciation of the artistic side of it. So yeah, so that's great. Thank you so much. I do have a bunch of different questions here to go through if we've got some time. So is that okay? Just sort of go through them now.
Of course, I'm happy to answer anything that you guys want to hear.
Cool. Okay. Here's a nice sort of interesting one to start us off with. What's your earliest memory of appreciating art?
Earliest memory?
Yeah, putting you on the spot there as well, actually, haven't I? So not necessarily an easy one to start off with. But yeah, what's your earliest memory of appreciating art? Just, maybe there's some kind of memory that sticks out to you.
I think, I'm not sure, but there was some kind of, like a lot of my art is, private art is comic art related or anime, manga, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I think it comes from me as a kid looking at some comic artists, and I was just amazed by how they could do certain things.
Yeah.
And I think that would be one of the earliest things that I can just remember on the spot. But Brilliant. It was a lot of those kind of artworks and cartoons, obviously. I watched a lot of cartoons and I always wanted to do some myself and animate and all those things that I consumed as a kid.
Yeah.
Always wanted to make stuff my own.
Which of course would have been a sort of a big inspiration in terms of, bits and bobs that you've done, I'm sure. So great stuff. Cool. If you could go back in time and give yourself one piece of advice in the context of your journey with your career, what would that be?
easy question because I've answered that a lot of times before.
Okay.
I would ask people for feedback more. I think I wasted so much time between the age of like 13 and 18 just doing stuff and struggling and not knowing what to do, but I would never reach out to anyone that I followed or really liked the art of to ask. I did that a few times, like when I already was kind of confident with my art, and it always boosted my motivation, but also my skills. Like they would tell me stuff that is super obvious, but I would never think of that.
Sure.
So I wish I would have done that earlier. I can only imagine where I would be today if I heard their opinions earlier.
Okay. So getting those views. Lovely, thank you. Okay, so I've got a question from Jake Benbow. Do you think that concepting in 3D alone can be enough for an art director, or do you need a solid 2D foundation also?
For art direction, you can do it in 3D too. I think that for 3D games especially, I know a few people who've worked on big games like the Spider-Man game for PlayStation. The art director I think, has a big 3D background mainly. And a lot of 3D games especially have art directors who are primarily coming from the 3D area. So they often don't really know much about 2D. So I think I'm rather an exception because most art directors I've talked to have a stronger 3D background than 2D. But there are a lot of 2D ones that I know, but most of the ones that I met at conventions and meetups are often 3D backgrounds.
Yeah. And I imagine obviously it's all kind of relative, because like you say, your background is more or less sort of 2D, and therefore perhaps the projects you found yourself involved in, obviously it lends itself to that kind of area of expertise, doesn't it? So yeah, it's all kind of relative. So so I suppose what we're saying is, it doesn't matter too much in terms of one way or the other. It just means that's probably the journey that you'll take in terms of the direction that you'll move forward with. So. Perfect. Thank you.
Exactly.
Do you have a favorite part of being an art director? Is there something that you like? That something sticks out to you? Maybe it's like a specific point that you get to, or.
I like the research part, especially at the beginning. Like I hear the game designer, and I need to think of an art style, and there's so many different art styles, and you would like to do all of them, but obviously a game can't have so many art styles, it can only have one. And I also quite enjoy, like it's something I just recently have gotten into, like with the new game, with working with a lot more artists. The questions they have, like you feel more important. Like I don't enjoy it particularly, but it's kind of eye-opening. Like they just come to you with questions and you feel like, oh wow, it's me who has to decide this now. And
Yeah, totally. I can
you
imagine.
feel the responsibility. It's kind of scary, but it's also a new thing, so I kind of do enjoy it as well.
Yeah, totally. And I can imagine, just when you're having success with those things as well, and that you were a significant voice within that kind of that development, that creativity. So that must feel really good as well. Brilliant. I have a question from Joshua Bastareshi. Have you played Club Penguin? The Smurf art style reminds me of it. So I don't know if there's a connection there or.
I have not played it. I think I was a bit too old when that game came out, but of course I know that game.
Yeah. Okay.
And I do see why you see the similarities. I have never thought of it that way. But I think that would have been a great game to work on just from a style. Yeah. It's very similar. I would love that.
Yeah. Maybe Club Penguin was inspired by the Smurf art style, perhaps. Who knows?
I don't know which one's older.
Yeah, I've got no idea. I've absolutely no idea. So maybe Josh will come back in and let us know in a bit. Great stuff. So how do you try and get the best out of the people and departments that you're in charge of? Obviously, you've given us some fantastic information already about the need to kind of have like that really good, effective communication with those departments and sort of feedback. Is that it? Is that kind of the keys to the universe stuff? Is there something else, you know, that perhaps you need to be aware of, you know, when trying to get the best out of those departments?
I often, especially when it's like the pre-production, so we don't have anything that's super important to work on. Like there is nothing that needs to be done right now, but things have to be researched, of course. So I like to go to the artist and just ask them, like, what do you want to do? Like, is there something that we will need and that you would really like to research or do? And just get them a little bit more involved. Like, I think they are artists at the end of the day, and they really like being creative. And if everything just comes from a person, like even my concepts, they are at the end of the day, that's how it should be. But if they have a better idea and they want to be creative as well, I'm open for it. Like they can explore stuff. And I think that involvement and that freedom is appreciated because they always do find a lot of cool ideas. And they're not just like, I don't know what the English word would be for that, but they're not machines, you know, they're not doing stuff. They're thinking, they're being creative, and they're exploring on their own. And this is what I kind of like, that collaborative process sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's a good way to get the best out of them and keep them motivated.
Yeah, yeah. Because I mean, one would assume as well that those people had wanted to work for, you know, for a games company, because of that creative drive they have in them. So allowing them to have that kind of creative freedom as well, I'm sure that would be supportive.
Of course,
I think that's interesting as well in terms of, like, you know, perhaps the audience for today's talk as well, because I'm sure not everybody in the world sort of thinks to themselves, you know, that's interested in art. They might go, oh, my goal is to become an art director. Much like yourself, perhaps. You weren't necessarily wanting to. You didn't have that thought in your mind where you were like, okay, I'm definitely going to become an art director. That's my goal. Maybe it's just one of those things that just happens, kind of thing.
Exactly.
But then I think perhaps for everybody else, it's quite nice to sort of hear a little bit about maybe those expectations from someone that is working in that capacity as an art director in terms of how they work with their teams and stuff. And I think that's probably, you know, one of the really interesting dynamics about this talk today, in order to be able to kind of give people that understanding and that overview. So yeah, thank you. So I'm sure, like many people in the talk today, I noticed there was on one of your slides that you guys are hiring at the moment, which is obviously super interesting. I had a sneaky peek at the website for the job opportunities. I don't know if they're all up there, but so obviously we've got things like AI gameplay developer, user experience, user interface designer, gameplay developer, Unity developer, Unreal Engine 4 developer. You know, so we have a lot of students that work on some of those areas, you know, at Confetti. And I actually think a question's come through about it as well, about would Bongfish be the studio that would consider working with people remotely, you know, so could people kind of work in the UK and do that? Is that anything you've ever sort of like considered beforehand? I know some companies do.
Our game designer for Smurfs, he worked from Canada.
Oh, brilliant.
Because the game, it was made in Canada. Capcom had a studio there. And he lived there, and we hired him, and he used to work from there. And he later on moved to Peru to his girlfriend, and he worked from Peru remotely. Our community manager for that game as well worked from somewhere in the US. I forgot which state. So yeah, we have worked with people, but I think that's a case-by-case basis.
Sure.
So I cannot promise that everyone can work from home.
Of course, yeah. No, that's most understandable. And we will have some 3D modelers, some animators, some artists as well in the audience today. Do we just tell them to keep their eyes peeled? Things coming up in the future?
You can, but I also would recommend applying without even the position being up there, if you're interested, of course, because someone will look at the portfolio, and if it's good enough, we will keep you in the loop. Like we are hiring now for our current project. Like when we get into production, we've not even put out a position for that yet. We just hired people that applied before. And it's always nice for us to know that there's already people who might be ready to already start working. Of course, if you already have another job by then, it's sad. But in that case, we will just open up a position for that and hope for people that apply.
Cool. Well, that sounds really progressive. That, you know, because obviously it allows people to be proactive, then, doesn't it? Send their information through, and you've got it there ready just in case. So, yeah, that's really cool. Okay, well, guys, you heard it here. If you're interested, then send those CVs through. Okay, I think we've got time for just a couple more questions.
I see there's a few more here on Zoom.
Yeah. So obviously with you know, I think you kind of captioned it perhaps on like your last slide and maybe your second to last slide, just about the kind of the summary perhaps of what an art director does, and I think you said that it's essentially a supervisory role. Would you say then that as a result of this is sort of taking you away from the art a little bit in terms of developing it yourself? I mean, is that something that you're now having to kind of you know, do things almost outside of work just to kind of keep? Obviously, you spoke earlier about like the love of art and developing it, so perhaps it's something that you're still keeping fresh by doing it outside, you know, just because the role itself doesn't necessarily allow you to do it as much.
Yeah, that's. I used to do, like, even when I used to do a lot of art during work, like at work, I still did the work, like the art at home. Like that's something that's always there. But it is true that currently there's not so much art that I can do at work. I still get to do some concepts here and there. But I think that's also the nature of the current project, because it's quite large, and for each thing there's a dedicated artist. On a smaller project, as I said with the Smurfs, I would still do all the art with the art direction because there was not so many artists that could handle it. So I'm just, right now I'm mainly doing art direction and concepts, but we are hiring concept artists later on when we get into production. So I'm not even sure how long I will be doing these concepts. Sure. I will try to do it as long as possible. Yeah. But if they don't want me to do it anymore, or if I have bigger important tasks, I mean.
Of course, yeah, naturally, because obviously a big part of what you're doing is talking to those different departments, the 3D department, the animation department. That actually takes us neatly on to the kind of the next question, actually. So you know, it seems like you do have so many different roles, so many different jobs. You know, do you ever get burnt out?
There are periods where I get home and I don't really want to do any art. Quite often. But I don't really get burned out because, as you've seen, I mean, especially what he said, different roles and different things. It's that thing that keeps me interested. Like if it was always the same tasks and it's just that, I think I would get burned out much quicker than if it was always something different and not always the same stuff to work on. So I do kind of enjoy that change that I get.
Lovely, cool. Okay, so I think we've got time for just one final question. What is it that you like to see from the people that you work with? Actually, I think the reason why that question has come about is when you were talking about like your journey. You mentioned about how you had to kind of almost change the animation tool, and you kind of you sort of threw yourself in there and made a lot of changes and stuff to that. Is that kind of what you're expecting to see from the people that you're working with? Would you hope to sort of see that level of commitment?
I mean, it's always nice to see that, but it's not always the case. And I just try to keep people a bit committed and motivated. So that's what I also said. Ask them what they would like to do. Like that's also one of the things I do often just ask them, how are you feeling? Like, are you happy with the current stuff that you do? And quite often the artist will be there and say, I don't really, like, I'm not progressing. I feel like I'm not good enough for this and I feel down. And then just sometimes it just takes a little bit of pep talk.
Sure.
Tell them that they're actually doing quite great and it's not that bad and we can figure it out. And often just take another artist to give a bit of feedback, and it always turned out good. So I haven't really had the experience with someone who wasn't really motivated at all. It's just sometimes people feel down. It's the nature of humans, I guess.
Sure. So
I try to be there.
Supervisor / I don't know, like father figure role or something like that.
I
maybe.
mean, at least at Bonkfish, it's I like to say like it's a group of friends working on projects.
Yeah.
Like we're all basically friends at the end of the day. In breaks, we all have passion for games. We talk about games a lot, about our favorite games, who's playing what, and we are doing the work. But at the end of the day, we're still all friends, kind of, and there for each other. So
Brilliant. Lovely. Well, thank you very much, Tom. That's been really, really useful. You know, again, lots of really interesting information in there, especially in view of. I like the bit about how you broke down. You know, this is what you do as an art director, but also, you know, the role of an art director can be, you know, it can be varied depending on where you're working, in terms of the company as well. Lovely. Okay, so that's all we have time for in terms of the session. Tom, if you wouldn't mind just hanging on for a little bit, just because we just sort of do a little bit of a debrief and just some bits and bobs to go through. But yes, for the rest of you, thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you found it useful. And yeah, obviously, I think there was one or two questions in there about whether this is going to be recorded. It probably will appear on the on-demand section afterwards as well. I'm just having a thumbs up there as well on that one, so that's great. So yeah, any other bits that you missed, or obviously there was some really good information there that you might want to go back over, you'll find it in there. But for now, thank you very much, everybody. And yeah, I hope you enjoy the rest of your industry week.
thanks, everyone.